You bought a rose for your patio or balcony. You imagined it spilling over the edge of a beautiful pot, covered in blooms all summer long. And what you actually got was a plant that looked reasonable for about 6 weeks, then slowly declined, yellowing leaves, fewer and fewer flowers, and by midsummer a leggy, struggling plant that looked nothing like what you pictured. And you assumed you just are not a rose person. That roses in pots do not really work. That the people growing spectacular container roses must know something you do not. They do. And it is not complicated. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from and whether you are growing roses in pots or in the ground. If you are in a small space, a balcony, a patio, a courtyard, tell me that too. I read every single one, and I want to know how many gardeners out there are trying to make roses work in containers, because almost nobody makes content specifically for you. Here is the truth. Roses in pots fail for 5 specific reasons that have nothing to do with your skill as a gardener and everything to do with how container growing changes the rules. The same rose that thrives in the ground will struggle in a pot if you treat it exactly the same way. The secrets are not about working harder. They are about understanding what changes when the plant leaves the ground. Stay with me through secret number 3. That is the one that explains why container roses that look perfect in spring almost always decline by August. And it is the secret that separates a pot rose that performs for one season from one that comes back stronger every year. Number 1. The pot size mistake that kills more container roses than anything else. The wrong assumption: a bigger pot later is fine. Start with something manageable and upgrade when the plant needs it. Here is why this kills container roses specifically. Roses have extensive, aggressive root systems that spread outward as much as downward. In the ground, those roots find water and nutrients across a wide area. In a pot, the roots reach the container walls within one growing season and begin circling, a condition called root binding, where the roots have nowhere to go and begin strangling themselves. A root-bound rose cannot uptake water or nutrients efficiently regardless of how much you provide. The leaves yellow. The plant declines. You assume something is wrong with your care when the problem was established on planting day. The minimum pot size for a standard bush rose is 15 to 20 gallons, roughly 18 inches wide and 18 inches deep. For climbing or larger shrub roses, 25 gallons minimum. For miniature roses, 10 gallons is acceptable. This feels enormous for a plant you bought in a 1-gallon nursery pot. That instinct to start smaller is exactly what creates the root binding problem. Roses need room to establish a root system that can support continuous blooming through a full season. A pot that feels too big on planting day will feel exactly right by midsummer. Material matters too and goes consistently unanswered in container gardening content. Terracotta breathes. It allows air exchange through the pot wall, which benefits root health but also loses moisture faster, meaning more frequent watering in summer. Plastic and glazed ceramic retain moisture longer but can overheat in direct afternoon sun, cooking the roots. In hot climates, a light-colored pot in an insulating material is better than dark terracotta that absorbs heat. In cool, damp climates, terracotta's faster drying is an advantage. Match the pot material to your specific climate rather than choosing purely on aesthetics. Drainage holes are non-negotiable. At least 2 holes of at least half an inch diameter. Never grow a rose in a pot without drainage holes, regardless of how careful you are with watering. Standing water at the base of a container rose causes crown rot faster than almost any other mistake. Number 2. The soil mix that actually works, and why standard potting compost fails by midsummer. The wrong assumption: good quality potting compost is all you need. Standard potting compost is engineered for moisture retention. It holds water well, which is generally a virtue. For container roses specifically, that moisture retention becomes a problem by midsummer when the plant is at peak size, peak root mass, and peak water demand simultaneously. Standard compost compresses under the weight of an established rose's root system, loses its structure, and either holds too much water causing root rot or dries into a solid mass that water runs straight through without penetrating. The mix that works for container roses long-term: 60% quality loam-based compost, the kind with actual soil in it rather than pure peat or coir, 30% horticultural grit or perlite for drainage and structure, and 10% well-rotted organic matter such as garden compost or composted bark. This combination holds enough moisture for the rose's needs while draining freely enough to prevent waterlogging, and maintains its physical structure through heat and repeated watering cycles without compressing into a solid block. Add a layer of broken crockery or large gravel at the bottom of the pot before filling, not to improve drainage as commonly believed, but to prevent the drainage holes from becoming blocked by compacted compost as the season progresses. One specific addition that goes completely unmentioned in standard container rose content: a handful of mycorrhizal fungi granules worked into the compost at planting time. These beneficial fungi colonize the rose's root system and dramatically increase the surface area through which the plant can absorb water and nutrients, compensating for the limited root volume that a container imposes compared to open ground. The difference in establishment speed and first-season performance between roses planted with and without mycorrhizal inoculant is measurable and significant. Repot every 2 years minimum. Container compost depletes and compresses beyond recovery over time, regardless of how well you feed. A rose that performed well for 2 years and then declined for no obvious reason is almost always in exhausted, compacted, salt-accumulated compost that needs replacing. Number 3. The watering rhythm that prevents the midsummer decline almost every container rose experiences. This is the one I told you to wait for. And it explains something that frustrates container rose growers more than anything else: a plant that looks spectacular in May and June and then inexplicably declines through July and August despite consistent care. Here is the mechanism. In spring, a container rose is establishing its root system, pushing new growth, and operating at relatively low water demand. The compost stays moist between waterings naturally. The plant looks healthy because conditions are genuinely good. By midsummer, everything has changed. The plant is at full size. The root system fills the container. The canopy is large and losing moisture through the leaves rapidly. Ambient temperatures are at their highest. And the same watering schedule that worked perfectly in May, perhaps every 2 or 3 days, is now dramatically insufficient. The compost dries out completely between waterings. The roots experience repeated wet-dry cycling that stresses them. The plant responds by dropping leaves, reducing bloom production, and generally declining in ways that look like disease or nutrient deficiency but are actually chronic, cumulative water stress. The fix is not simply watering more, it is adjusting your watering rhythm seasonally rather than maintaining a fixed schedule year-round. In spring, water when the top 2 inches of compost feel dry. For most climates, this is every 2 to 3 days. In midsummer, check daily. Water when the top inch is dry rather than the top 2 inches. In a heat wave with temperatures above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, container roses may need watering every single day. Push your finger into the compost rather than judging by the surface. The surface can appear dry while moisture remains lower down, and conversely can appear acceptable while the root zone is critically dry. The self-watering pot solution, pots with built-in reservoirs that the plant draws from as needed, eliminates the midsummer decline problem almost entirely for container roses. The reservoir maintains consistent moisture at the root level without the wet-dry cycling that causes stress. If you are growing container roses on a balcony or patio where daily watering is difficult, self-watering containers are the single most impactful upgrade available. One specific watering mistake that appears in container gardening comments across every plant: watering until you see water appear at the drainage holes and assuming the pot is thoroughly watered. In compacted or hydrophobic compost, water channels through one path and exits the drainage hole without hydrating the majority of the root zone. Water slowly and thoroughly, a slow trickle for several minutes rather than a fast pour, and if your compost has become water repellent, submerge the entire pot in a bucket of water for 30 minutes to fully rehydrate the root zone before returning to normal watering. Number 4. Feed container roses twice as often as you think you need to. Container roses are the hungriest plants in most gardens, and almost every gardener underfeeds them. Here is why the feeding requirement is so much higher than for ground-grown roses. In the ground, a rose's root system accesses nutrients across a wide area of soil. Soil bacteria and fungi break down organic matter continuously and make nutrients available in a steady stream. The plant draws from a large, living system that replenishes itself. In a container, the plant draws from a fixed, finite volume of compost that depletes with every watering cycle. Every time you water, soluble nutrients leach out through the drainage holes. By midsummer, a container rose planted in spring compost has exhausted a significant portion of the available nutrients regardless of what quality compost you started with. The feeding rhythm that works: a slow-release granular rose fertilizer worked into the top inch of compost in early spring provides the foundation. Then liquid feeding every 10 to 14 days through the growing season, A potassium-forward liquid fertilizer applied at half the label strength to avoid salt accumulation. This is twice the frequency most gardeners use and significantly more frequent than ground-grown roses need. The salt accumulation problem is specific to containers and goes almost completely unaddressed in standard rose content. Repeated fertilizer applications in a confined soil volume cause soluble salts to build up in the compost over time. Symptoms look identical to drought stress, brown crispy leaf tips and edges, but do not respond to watering. Every few weeks, water the container heavily and thoroughly, 3 times the normal volume in a single session, to flush accumulated salts downward and out through the drainage holes. This single practice prevents the most common fertilizer-related decline in container roses. Hard stop on feeding, 6 weeks before your expected first frost. Late feeding pushes soft new growth that cannot harden before cold and damages the plant going into dormancy. Number 5. Overwintering in a container, the make or break moment most gardeners get wrong. Everything in Secrets 1 through 4 determines how well your container rose performs through the growing season. This secret determines whether you have a container rose at all next spring. The wrong assumption: if the rose variety is hardy in your zone, it will survive winter in a container without special treatment. Here is why this assumption is dangerously wrong. A rose rated hardy to Zone 5 is rated hardy when its roots are in the ground, insulated by the thermal mass of surrounding soil that stays significantly warmer than air temperature even in hard freezes. The same rose in a container has its roots surrounded by a thin wall of pot material with no thermal insulation. Air temperature drops to Zone 5 minimum and the root zone drops to the same temperature almost immediately. The roots freeze at temperatures that would not affect the same plant in the ground. A Zone 5 hardy rose in a container may need Zone 7 or 8 protection to survive the same winter its in-ground counterpart handles easily. The practical implications: in Zone 6 and colder, container roses need active winter protection. The most effective method for most gardeners: move the container to an unheated but frost-protected space, a garage, a shed, an unheated greenhouse, for the coldest months. The rose goes dormant and needs no light during dormancy, only occasional watering to prevent the root ball desiccating completely. Check monthly and water lightly if the compost has dried out entirely. Return to outdoor conditions gradually in spring as temperatures reliably stay above freezing. If moving the container is impractical due to size or weight, insulate it in place. Wrap the pot in several layers of bubble wrap, hessian, or horticultural fleece, not the plant, the pot, to insulate the root zone. Pile mulch or straw around the wrapped pot for additional insulation. Move the pot against a south-facing wall which retains heat better than an exposed position. This is less reliable than moving the container indoors but provides meaningful protection in Zones 7 and warmer. In Zones 8 and warmer, where hard freezes are rare or absent, container roses generally overwinter without special treatment. Cut back by about a third in late autumn to reduce windrock, the physical movement of the plant in winter wind that loosens root anchoring, and apply a fresh layer of compost to the top of the pot to replace nutrients depleted through the growing season. One final note that saves container rose collections every year: bring the pot inside before the first hard freeze rather than after it. The root zone of a container can freeze solid in a single overnight hard frost that the in-ground version shrugs off entirely. Watch the forecast and act before the first freeze rather than assessing damage after it. 5 secrets that change everything about growing roses in containers, and none of them are about working harder or spending more money. Start with a pot that feels too big on planting day, 15 to 20 gallons minimum, because root binding is established before you ever see a symptom. Build a soil mix with structure that lasts through the season rather than compressing into a block by mid-summer. Adjust your watering rhythm seasonally rather than maintaining a fixed schedule. Daily checking in July heat, less frequent in cool spring conditions. Feed every 10 to 14 days with liquid fertilizer and flush salt accumulation every few weeks with a heavy watering. And protect the root zone in winter as if your rose is 2 hardiness zones more tender than its label says. Do those 5 things and the container rose that declined on your patio every summer becomes the one your visitors stop to photograph every time they walk past. Subscribe, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of specific, practical knowledge that fills the gap standard gardening content leaves behind. New video every 2 days. And drop your answer in the comments before you go. Are you growing roses in containers right now, and if so, what is your biggest challenge? Watering, feeding, winter survival, or something else? Tell me your zone and your pot situation. I read every single one and your answer shapes what I cover next.